David. David. Hello, welcome to the David Wells Experiment. I'm your host, David Wells. So, this is going to be a brief podcast, although you could say that about all of them. They do tend to vary in length from 13 to about 38 minutes. Interestingly enough, my 38-minute one has so far been the most viewed of my podcasts. I think it has to do with the subject matter. Well, anyway, so what I'm going to talk about today is the MCU versus Pixar. So, I remember when Pixar was like the golden child of animation. They're the blameless lamb that could do no wrong. Nowadays, you could contest that. Now, to be fair, Pixar still makes great movies. Even one of their lackluster efforts is as good or better than one of, say, DreamWorks' best efforts. But it's still like a fall from grace from what they used to be. Especially given how their movies of recent, from Soul up until Red, um, have been released exclusively to Disney Plus. It's just so funny in their history as acquisitions of Disney. Pixar was the first of Bob Iger's major acquisitions, um, as his in his turn as CEO of Disney, and he said it was the one he was most proud of. So, interestingly enough, I think that when Disney bought Pixar, it benefited them hugely, but not in the way you would think. It wasn't like, oh, they've got Pixar now. They're always going to get that money. I think in a way, Disney caused sort of a brain drain from Pixar because I noticed that as Disney's movies got better, Pixar's started to get a bit lackluster. Um, I It had to do, I think, with John Lasseter spending more time building up Disney's infrastructure. So anyway, yeah, John Lasseter's focus was placed from Pixar onto Disney, or that's what it seems. And then in 2018, at the height of the Me Too movement, there was some behavior observed that was deemed inappropriate. So he elected to finish out the year and then he would part ways with Disney and Pixar. But by that point, he had he had strengthened Disney's animation enough where you heard more about them than you did Pixar, at least in my estimation. With Pixar, it became a thing of, okay, it's either that was pretty good or that was amazing. Whereas it used to just be that was amazing for each of their movies. Though that really did start with the release of Cars. I know everybody likes to pick on that movie. But for me, that was kind of the beginning of them going from perfect to sometimes they can mess up. And that was around the time that Disney bought them. I remember being pleasantly surprised by Meet the Robinsons and how good it was. I'm like, okay, that's not bad. And progressively, Disney's movies have gotten better. And it seems that even without John Lasseter at the helm of Pixar or being as involved as he was with Disney, it seems that somehow Disney is remaining consistent. I mean, who hasn't heard somebody talking about not talking about Bruno? I mean, that's probably going to be a meme that goes on forever. It could even surpass Let It Go. One of the things I was most psyched about was when Disney did buy Marvel back in 2009. I was excited at the prospect of Pixar doing something with Marvel properties, and I think John Lasseter basically said that he had some very exciting discussions, but that never went anywhere. We got Big Hero 6, which was released by Disney, not Pixar, was the closest we ever got to that, but they've stepped back from that. Disappointing that Marvel and Pixar never at some point converged to make something, but oh well. They're two powerhouses. I'm sure it's bound to happen. I guess Pixar is an example of you need vision to achieve the sort of six to achieve success and maintain it. And they kind of lost that with John Lasseter. And and that's and vision is no more exemplified by Kevin Feige, pun intended, because he's had an amazing track record. I've said this several times before. What's ironic though is we kind of owe Kevin Feige, we kind of owe the success of Marvel to two other films. And by Marvel, I mean the MCU. The first of all is the first X-Men, which I'll elaborate on the reasons in a second, and then the lackluster Daredevil, the one with Ben Affleck. So the great thing about the X-Men movies was it made people take a superhero movie seriously. And part of the reason that movie was successful was Kevin Feige, who was like super young back then. He was, I believe, interning at Richard Donner's production house, and they found out, oh, he knows a lot about comics. So let's tap his brain for ideas. So he was one of the things that helped make that movie great. And it makes sense in retrospect that Richard Donner was involved in the first X-Men movie because he approached the Superman movie, I think the word is vermicelitude. If I'm mispronouncing that, forgive me. Um, he tried to make things he tried to make things real and believable, and he believed if we can make the human drama real, then everything else follows. And even though he did direct X-Men, he brought that approach, and that had to have had an influence on Kevin Feige. This now regarding the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, you could wonder how is how did that lead up to the MCU? Well, if you're already well versed in the going-ons of all that, then you won't be surprised. That movie was where Avi Arad, who used to be the dude behind the Marvel movies, that's where he met Jon Favreau. So they got to talking and they realized they liked each other. And Avi Arad was like, hey, we're going to try to start making our own movies rather than licensing them out. So, let's keep in touch. And that, of course, led to Iron Man. I do believe at some point Fox actually owned the rights to Iron Man, but when they wanted to renew the rights, Marvel's like, nope, we're keeping that one for ourselves. Because they had plans going on of like what they wanted to do, and we all know where that led. I think it can't be understated enough that Kevin, I think I've mentioned it before, but one of the reasons why the MCU is so successful is because Kevin Feige had so much practice room as a producer on all those Marvel licensed Marvel movies. Basically, all the movies that were licensed to, say, Universal, 20th Century Fox, Sony, I think New Line Cinema. But anyway, he had a lot of experience of like giving his 2 cents and seeing what other people did with it. That when the time came, I think it was in 2005 when Marvel Studios in earnest began to build their cinematic universe. he had been around the block a couple times and he knew what it took to get things done. Now, that's not to say that they haven't experienced hiccups. I mean, the Iron Man movies and Thor 2 are kind of reviewed. They're remembered as lackluster efforts, but still pretty popular and financially successful lackluster efforts. But hey, I mean, that's pretty good. One thing I'm curious about is I'm kind of amazed at, like, how young Kevin Feige was, because I think he was either born in like 1970 or 1974. So he's pretty young for a movie producer. I think he was only in his like late 20s or early 30s, like when the X-Men and Spider-Man movies were happening. One thing I'm really curious about, I was going to say this before, but the thing I'm most curious about is at some point he's going to step down, and I wonder how far ahead into the future Marvel is looking, because the success of the MCU is strongly tied to his vision. And I gotta wonder, are there any succession plans for when he decides to step down? Or are they just gonna sort of wait to the last minute and only really have that conversation when he's like, hey guys, I think I gotta tap out? Because it's big shoes to fill. Like when Disney started Disney Plus, there were no plans for any of those movie spin-off shows. There was no plans for Falcon and Winter Soldier or Loki or WandaVision. But Disney was like, hey, could you come up with some Marvel related TV shows? And he found a way to make it work and fit into what they were going to do. So that just further speaks to his talent. And I would imagine that Marvel must be making plans, because they plan things so far in advance. I can't believe that they wouldn't be contemplating, like, okay, what's it gonna look like when Kevin either decides to move on or he just dies. I know that's a morbid thought to think about, but you could make the argument that he is as important to Marvel as Stan Lee was and still is. I remember seeing some petition a couple years ago, or maybe a year ago, to have him start making cameos in Marvel movies in lieu of Stan Lee, who sadly passed away in 2018. And I'm like, okay, that seems fair, because they are this sort of financial behemoth that basically other movie studios will make plans around them. Like, oh, we can't choose this date. It's going to be a Marvel release. We'll get swamped. So I'm curious to see how things go. And you have to wonder how long he wants to do this stuff. He seems blah. He seems really enthusiastic about it. So I don't know. On the off chance, on the million to one off chance that Kevin Feige hears this, you're doing great. Keep at it. And, thanks for the time you've chosen to give us. This has been the David Wells Experiment. I'm your host, David Wells, and we will see you next time.